Okay, thank you very much. I'm joined with Jerry once again, just to discuss a really interesting paper that you brought out recently, entitled, is it oxygen or electrons that our respiratory system delivers? Which a friend of mine just sent to me actually a couple of weeks ago, whenever, and I found it really intriguing and interesting, and it raises so many interesting questions. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you a bunch of questions about it.
I'm delighted to be here, Mark, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, thank you. So I just wondered what brought you to this research article in the first place, and how did you get the ideas behind this paper?
Well, thank you. So I'm glad you asked that question, because the respiratory system is not an area that I would consider an area in which I have great expertise. I've not spent 30 years studying respiration, but one of the features that you might say intrigues me is I'm interested in finding truth in science, and it doesn't matter what the topic is. Finding truth, or finding or identifying paradigms that don't make any sense really intrigues me, and I've done it. I don't know how successfully, because that remains to be seen in a whole bunch of areas. Starting my career in muscle contraction, and the theory that almost everybody believes is adequate was put forth by famous, extremely famous Nobel laureate Sir Andrew Huxley, member of the Huxley family, president of the Royal Society, master of Trinity College, Cambridge, and the kind of guy who, when he walks into the room, there's a hush. It's as though God has entered the room, that kind of, and but we found that his theory doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit so much evidence, and I came to realize, at least in that particular area, I realized something about the sociology of science, that if you're challenging a godlike figure, your chances of success are limited. If a worker in the field, a scientist in the field, has the choice of following the great Sir Andrew Huxley or following a challenger, the response is pretty clear. Nevertheless, I learned the real satisfaction of finding truth, of looking for truth, and that's why in the work that follows, we started studying water. And again, we found evidence that challenges the view, the widely held view that water doesn't do a whole lot of anything inside the cell, except being the bathing medium for the more important molecules of life. And we found that this is erroneous, and so you might say a kind of satisfaction comes from what we found, and in general, finding or coming closer to the truth, because we found that water is absolutely central to everything that occurs in the cell. And I wrote a couple of books on the subject, the second of which, the fourth phase of water, is popular on Amazon to the extreme. If one day I feel kind of down, I just look at the reviews and my spirit is buoyed. All of this is kind of oriented toward finding truth in nature, and that's not to get off topic too far, I have a book that's drafted and waiting for my son, the artist, who is a really gifted artist and is worth waiting for. It has to do with the structure of the atom. and I argue in the book that for very simple reasons that could be understood by a middle school student, the model fails. It's inadequate. And I come forth with a model that I think is closer to the truth, and I attempt to demonstrate that answers come very simply from the model. I even delved into volcanoes and earthquakes, and I've got a book first drafted on that subject. Where does the energy come from? And where I live in Seattle, we witnessed about 40 years ago Mount St. Helens blowing its top, and it changed its frame from looking like a bit like Mount Fuji, you know, with a classical little cone at the top, transforming into something where the top is completely blown off, and nobody knows where the energy for that comes. So you can talk about the movement of tectonic plates, but they move because of some energy. So what's the energy? And I deal with that. And what I'm trying to tell you is that for me, a huge satisfaction comes from trying to figure out how things really work. And I noticed that there are belief systems that exist, and often the belief systems look fine at the outset, but if you dig even slightly beneath the surface, you find anomalies. You find observations that simply don't fit, and it's those anomalies that, for me, that provoke me to ask questions about, is this really the mechanism? It doesn't matter, how well ingrained the matter is. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, and that's what inspires me. And so, it's a long, circuitous answer to your short and probing and interesting question. It's just that I'm in, if you quote, the business of finding truth in nature, and if something doesn't work, doesn't fit, it inspires me. I simply can't wait to sit down at the word processor and start thinking about writing an article or a book or something like that. And that's what the paper that you're talking about, that's what happened. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, but also let me just show the paper, if that's okay.
Sure. Why not?
Which I think should be on the screen now. So it's interesting what you said about your book coming out, because the first question I wrote down in my notes was what is an electron exactly?
Well, that is a valid question. So we think about electrons and protons as elementary particles of nature, and nobody, to my knowledge, has actually seen an electron, and nobody has actually seen a proton. These are subatomic particles that are too small to be seen by imaging methods that we have, which can't resolve down to that value.
Oh, what about like the double slit experiments where electrons were observed or not observed going through the double slit and sort of exhibiting the wave and particle like behavior? Is that not?
Well, nobody's seen the electron. It's inferred, that I'm not sure if your listeners are familiar with that experiment. You have two parallel slits, and you put light through, basically, and the light is very low intensity, and so the particles of light, so to speak, are going through kind of like one at a time, and despite that, you see an interference pattern on the screen behind those two slits, and so that, the interpretation of that has something to do with quantum mechanics. But the assumption is made that that light has particles. And one of the problems with, or light is composed of particles. You know, there are two views on light. One is that it's a wave, and the other is that it's a particle. And there are some experiments that fit with the idea that it's a particle, and some that fit with the idea that it's a wave. And so most physicists have come to the conclusion that it has wave-like and particle-like characteristics. One of the problems with that is a paper published some years ago by some Dutch, I think, biologists. They put, instead of putting light or electrons or particles of some sort through those double slits, they put cells through the double slit, and they found a similar diffraction pattern on the screen behind, you know, raising question of the interpretation of that experiment. And I think that needs to be looked into, but that experiment doesn't necessarily image an electron. There's an assumption that maybe what's being caused by all this are electrons or protons or some other particles. Is important, I think, to distinguish between evidence and conjecture. And you know, even though as people often like to say, 99% of scientists believe, that doesn't mean anything. Necessarily, is just because a lot of people think in a certain way. That way might be right, but it might not be right. I think the idea of electrons and protons and such is really a conjecture, and it fits a lot of evidence. And so it's like plus and minus charges. You know, the minus charges are the electrons, and the plus charges can be the protons. And we just, you know, we think so many experiments can be explained by minus, plus, yin, yang, whatever you want to call it. That there are actually postulates that are accepted by most people, and you know, I think, including myself, I have no reason to doubt. And because they fit many experiments, those postulates are interpreted as basic facts. They might be true, they might not be true, but I haven't encountered enough to raise any question at all about their existence.
So electrons, what about when you see like electricity or an electric shock or static, you actually see the lightning, or is that not electrons that you see, or is it something else?
No, it's not electrons per se. No, it's the electrons causing some excited state in the molecules nearby, which give off light. Okay. That's what happens when you see lightning, but it's not proof of the existence of electrons, you know, or protons for that matter. It's just proof of the existence of electricity.
While we're talking about the double slit experiment, what's your view on the whole change of when it gets weird about the observer changing what it does? Like, what is that about?
You're asking a lot of diverse questions. I mean, I know the experiment, but I guess I'm not really sure of the interpretation. It's just that more generally, that consciousness is really important, and intention is really important. And we've been studying the role of intention on water, because water is the main subject of our experimental study. And we found indeed, as other people have found before us, that intention plays an important effect, important role. And so we organize each year the annual conference on the physics, chemistry, and biology of water, and it's in its 16th year, I think. And each year there are several people who are reporting about the phenomenon of intention, water memory. The most distinguished of whom was Luc Montagnier, who presented each year at our conference for a decade, until unfortunately his death a couple of years ago. And so there's now more than ample information that consciousness definitely plays a role. And I think many people are familiar with the work of Emoto, who found years ago that if you impart positive intention to water, then you freeze the water and you look at the water crystals. The crystals are beautiful, and if you impart negative intention, then the crystals are ugly. And that has been followed by many studies that demonstrate that intention is really important. And then there's Rupert Sheldrake, who has been talking about his morphic resonance, I think it's called, theory, that all information is somehow stored, and your brain is merely a processor of that information that's stored somewhere out there. And so all of these phenomena that I've just been talking about could be relevant to the double slit experiment. You put your intention, and the substrate that stores the material, shall we say, or the waves or whatever it is that your intention imparts, is there. And so if it's there, it could have charge, for example, and charges could cause deviation in the path of electrons or light or whatever. This is completely unknown. I mean, all of this is pure, absolute conjecture, but there's something going on. There's something beyond just what we, what conventional science says. And this is a frontier subject. It's sort of like electricity was a few hundred years ago. We feel it, we see it, but what's it all about? And until Maxwell came around and clarified a few things, not completely clarified at this point, I should say, nobody understood what electromagnetic energy was. And right now, a similar position could be occupied by this intention energy. We don't know. It tends to be dismissed by the mainstream as, pseudoscience, nonsense, whatever terms they like to use. But there's actually so much evidence for it now that it's incumbent on scientists. I mean, this is what we do for a living. You find, you see or hear whatever, an observation, and if enough people can repeat it, and it looks like there's something to it, it's our job to figure out what's going on. That's not a direct response to, a direct answer to your question, but it's, I'm afraid, it can't go beyond being rather indirect.
No, it's interesting. And what you said about, the mental side to do with the electrons, and I'm thinking about breathwork techniques like Wim Hof and other breathwork practitioners, and also what happens to people when they get anxiety or their breathing respiratory rate can increase, which is something going on in the biology as well, probably because of like maybe stress hormones, and then increasing the need for electrons or something like that. So also I looked up the world record for holding your breath is something like over 20 minutes. It's like 24 minutes.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I'm impressed. I
would struggle to do it for a minute and a half, but actually, and when I was going through your paper, actually, when you get into the bit about fish and the deep sea fish and stuff, I was looking that up as well. I was like, how do deep sea fish, manage? And I was wondering, is it because they move much slower, so they conserve the energy, basically, at the depths we're talking about? So
fish moves very slowly, and some can move at a very rapid clip.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I know of evidence that the deep sea fish never move at rapid clips. Maybe that's true. I'm just not aware. But I mean, the fish is one prime example of we haven't talked about the hypothesis that I'm proposing, which is is a rather radical hypothesis, but an example of support for that hypothesis is the fish. And maybe I should state, or you state, whatever, what the hypothesis is, so your listeners are not in the dark. Is that appropriate or not appropriate?
Yeah, I've got it on the screen here. So a mechanism has been proposed that circumvents certain confounding issues arising from conventional understanding.
Well, I meant a more general hypothesis rather than just fish. But
yeah.
But I mean, fish. It's okay to begin with fish if you like. So think about fish. Now, fish have tissues similar to our tissues, and you might think that oxygen supply would be important for the fish, just as it's important for us. So is this possible? Well, the deep sea fish, some of them are 5 or 6 miles down, and where do they get the oxygen? So the oxygen in the atmosphere can certainly diffuse down, but by the time you get to 20 or 30 feet down, there's not much oxygen, and there could be mixing, and so deep down you might get some oxygen, but measurements have shown that there are some areas down below that are virtually free of oxygen. So strictly, I mean, it's hard to imagine that the fish can live on oxygen. And in fact, if the fish comes out of the water, there's plenty of oxygen, but the fish dies, right? And so something is wrong with that hypothesis, because fish swim perfectly well, and they thrive, and they bathe in a sea of happiness, I guess, deep down, miles down. And how do they do it? And so in this, I present evidence of how did the fish survive, and so fish take in water in their mouths, and they expel the water in those curved structures, the gill slits on either side. So there's input and output, and it turns out that the output, measurements have shown that the output contains positive charge. And if the output contains, if you breathe in, so to speak, or take in water that's neutral, and the water that comes out is positively charged, it must mean that the negative charge, because you need negative charge somewhere, because you start with something neutral, and that what X is positive. Therefore, the negative charge must be absorbed by the fish, and there's a mechanism to do that. Actually, it's the gills, and the gills absorb negative charge, and this negative charge is then given to the capillaries, which are surrounding the gills, and the capillaries transmit the negative charge to the tissues, which require negative charge for their sustenance. So that's one piece of evidence, you might say, that the fish is using negative charge, and so that fits very well with the main hypothesis, which is that you and I also breathe actually negative charge. So, and the main reason for suggesting that, and I'm suggesting that we extract negative charge from the air. We don't extract oxygen from the air. So what are the reasons, besides the fish example? What are the reasons for thinking that? Well, the air contains 18% or 20% or so of oxygen and close to 80% nitrogen. Now, nitrogen and oxygen are almost the same size. Nitrogen is actually smaller on the periodic table than oxygen. And so when you breathe in the gases in the air, there are more substances in the air, but those are the two main ones. You'd expect that, so you breathe in air, and the air comes to the alveoli, these balloon-like sacs. And it's said that oxygen penetrates, and the oxygen then diffuses into the capillaries that envelop, surround each alveolus, and it's the oxygen that's carried to the tissues. But if that's true, then why don't we breathe mostly nitrogen? Nitrogen's smaller if there are, you might say, pores or something that facilitates the transport of these gases. You'd expect that we would have mostly nitrogen in getting to our blood, not oxygen, but we don't. We don't have nitrogen, and nitrogen can kill us. So there's something wrong with this hypothesis, and our study.
A question about that particular point. Is it possible that the nitrogen does pass like the barrier, but then just come back out again straight away without reacting, or not? Same as.
Well, comes out where? You mean backward through the alveoli?
A bit like same as hydrogen. Like if I was saturated with hydrogen, the excess would just come out with my exhalation breath.
Well, yeah. So the nitrogen then needs to pass back through the alveolus or the alveoli, I'm not sure of the evidence of this, but I'm pretty certain that the nitrogen does come out. You breathe it in and then you exhale, and the nitrogen comes out. I'm afraid I don't know the evidence for this, but I think it's true. So you're suggesting one step beyond. You're suggesting that the nitrogen actually passes through the alveolus to the blood supply, and then goes from the blood supply back out again. Well, I haven't thought about that idea. First thought that comes to mind is that the blood is always flowing through the capillaries, and by the time you breathe in the nitrogen, so to speak, the blood containing the nitrogen will have already passed on to the rest of the respiratory of the cardiovascular system, and so not so easy to imagine that it comes out. But that's something worth thinking about. It's a more complicated hypothesis.
Because I was thinking also, if you think about people being poisoned in a gas chamber with chlorine or fluoride or whatever,
yeah,
the poisonous gas must pass through, surely.
Yep. Yeah.
And then that's how it works. So
we presume that that's how it works, and but the point is, there are some larger molecules that either do pass through, or another possibility is that these molecules somehow impact the alveolar material, not allowing whatever does pass through to pass through. That's another way of dying or of poisoning. So that's a possibility, and I'm sorry to say I'm not well schooled in the mechanism of these poisonous agents, but you see, if these larger molecules pass through, we have to understand why nitrogen doesn't pass through. and because nitrogen is the smallest of the elements, and it's hard to understand the mechanism that passes the larger molecules, but somehow doesn't allow the smaller ones to get through. And that's one reason why I've suggested that it's the electrons that get through. Electrons can easily pass through any conductive medium. And are absorbed by the hemoglobin in the red blood cells and then passed on to the body. And the body must absolutely have negative charges. My fourth phase of water book provides the experimental basis and theoretical basis for that, and plus many papers that came that suggest that the negative charge inside our cells is absolutely essential for health. If you don't have enough negative charges, as in EZ water, which fills the cell, you're ill. Your cells are dysfunctional, and if there's a really serious lack of negative charge, then you're pathological. So the cell absolutely needs negative charge. It's one of the reasons why, maybe this is slightly off subject, but why the trees live so long. So some of the trees in the hills of Jerusalem, the olive trees, are said to date back from biblical times. That's like a couple thousand years. And in Africa, the baobab trees that I saw on, traveling through Africa, the guide said, oh, they live about 5,000 years. So why are they so resilient? Whereas in our case, if we make it to 100, we're happy. Some less happy, some more happy. But the roots of trees penetrate into the earth, and the earth is negatively charged. I didn't know that until 25 years ago, but there's plenty of evidence for it, and it's just that we don't learn about the evidence. We don't learn the phenomenon. So the tree's roots, where the action is, penetrate down into a sea of practically infinite negative charge. And they need that negative charge for health and for life. And so trees, because of this, they can be healthy, live on for many, many years beyond the time that we can live. So negative charge is really important, and we feel, if we're near, for example, a waterfall, which sends off aerosol droplets consisting of water, and we found experimentally these droplets are negatively charged. We breathe them, and we need the negative charge, and we feel healthy and feel good. And we walk on the beach barefoot, connect ourselves electrically to the earth. We feel good because we're absorbing negative charge. So the body, the cells, absolutely need a negative charge, and so the idea then is not so preposterous. The idea that by breathing we get negative charge, and then I'm sorry to keep spouting off like this, but I keep thinking there are the experiments of what's his name, Quinton, Rene Quinton, spelled Quinton, or Quinton. So he was a scientist from some years back, and he did experiments on dogs, and he found, and he used a kind of water drawn from the ocean, actually specific places in the ocean near algae blooms, and translation parenthetically, because of these algae blooms, there was probably a lot of easy water with negative charge, because algae, like other animals, plants, whatever, single-celled organisms, are just filled with negative charge. So at any rate, he experimented with dogs, and he drew almost all the blood from the dogs and replaced it with this kind of water. And the dogs survived for a day or so. So here's an example where there's no hemoglobin, right? And so the idea of storage of oxygen in the hemoglobin in the red blood cells is impossible because almost all the blood has been removed, and yet the dog survived. So the concept that we take the oxygen, goes to the alveoli, goes to the blood, stored in the red blood cells, transported to the rest of the body, it doesn't make sense because the system is interrupted, yet the dogs survived perfectly well for at least for a period of time. Those are really important experiments, and I think they need to be repeated because they're not so well known. And this took place, I guess, about a century ago. So that's another piece of evidence that it looks like for survival, we don't need the system that is now in all the textbooks. So that's another piece of, you might say, interesting information.
Yeah, I just wanted to share my window actually, just because reading your paper, I sort of looked up the hemoglobin molecule and wanted to see what its geometry looked like, and sort of looking at pictures of it here. Is that actually how it looks? If you were,
I don't know. How would you know? I
mean, in a actual blood cell, could you put it on a microscope and it would have this actual geometry? Is that why it looks like this?
Well, you need resolution enough to see what it looks like, and the way you can do that is using electron microscopy. But electron microscopy is known for its voluminous artifacts because there are, roughly 10 steps to prepare something to be viewed by electron microscopy, and the experts agree. This is not my conjecture, that each step is prone to artifact, and when you deal with 10 steps, you're not sure that what you're looking at is really the real thing or has been modified by one or more of those steps of electron microscopy. So maybe, and I see some images that you're showing on the screen right now.
Are these like real images, or they don't look real? But I mean, this doesn't look me.
I don't know the source of what you've got, but the upper ones look like real images. But you can see the resolution of those images, is not so great. And so if you considering first the fact that the images might be artifactual, and second, you have to draw conclusions based on those fuzzy images. The results are not always so clear. Okay, there are a lot.
Another thing I thought about, which was a thought that your paper brought up, was about Nikola Tesla, who obviously great mind, genius of modern day electricity and everything, whose one health device was the violet ray, Tesla's violet ray it was called, which was like and they, in these nice cases they would have different glass kind of implements, and then it would look like this violet UV. So it had, I think it was actually using UV and ozone and high voltage to treat skin diseases, hair growth, encouraging hair growth, joint muscle pains, etc., and artery and vein diseases as well.
Well, I hear you. So let me address the ultraviolet or violet. Let me address the electrical aspect. First of all, we studied which wavelengths of light build EZ, and we concluded that originally, this was a study of more than a decade ago, that ultraviolet had basically no effect. Violet had no effect. The rest of the visual spectrum had very little effect. When you get to the longer wavelengths, red, there was a little effect, and then you move into still longer wavelengths, infrared, and there you had a magnificent effect, especially at a wavelength of about 3 micrometers. A very small amount of infrared light produced a vast expansion of the EZ. But more recently, we studied ultraviolet light, and although it indeed does not expand the exclusion zone or increase the fourth phase of water, it actually increases, we found, increases the charge, the negative charge of the fourth phase. And we published this a year ago. And so, because charge is so important in our cells, the charge is so important that I could imagine that ultraviolet or violet wavelengths very close to one another has that impact, and the charge is important, and so that would facilitate health. And in terms of electricity, we found also experimentally that if we take water, pure water, liquid water, and we put negative charge into it through an electrode, the water surrounding that electrode transitions from ordinary liquid water to EZ or fourth phase water with negative charge. So you don't need anything more than just current flow to create EZ water. And if Tesla was using high voltage produces current, and current is important for building negatively charged EZ water. So that would be my initial conjecture about that. Obviously, it's a mere conjecture. I would need to study it in greater detail to say anything more intelligent. But that's a kind of initial response.
Yeah, I mean, I did some research into them. I've been interested in these devices for quite a while. I've got a few of them, but I did discover that the majority of them were seized by the FDA in the 1950s, so they kind of disappeared completely. Yeah. But in the 1920s and so on, they were like really big, and all the doctors had them and stuff. So
yes, I am aware, especially of the particular frequencies that are used by this. And there was just a video I saw featuring Royal Wright, whose work was prominent in that area. And now there are people who have recovered some of the information from some of these pioneers and are using it and in frequency-specific microcurrent, for example, and pulse electromagnetic fields. These devices and such, which seem to be working pretty well for many afflictions, they're based on frequencies of some of the pioneers that you're talking about.
Yeah, and how about just defibrillators? When someone uses a defibrillator to get someone's heart going again, does that send a negative charge to the heart?
Well, it sends current through the heart, and and what the current does is that it you might say it starts the system from ground zero. It's like rebooting your computer, and when the heart is in fibrillation, the currents are actually flowing from cell to cell in random ways, not in the coordinated way that's necessary to have a coordinated heartbeat. So you're missing this coordinated heartbeat, and you basically shock the cell. Everything goes back to zero, and it starts all over again, and presumably a more normal way. I mean, I think that's what's going on with the defibrillators. It's not that there's a particular frequency, because it's basically a shock.
Yeah, but looking back at the hemoglobin structure, it kind of looked like something you'd see in a circuit or something you'd see in a church stained glass window.
I've seen many stained glass windows, and it never occurred to me, but I could imagine such. Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah. Maybe the ancients knew more than we give them credit for.
Yeah, I mean, what's your view on the whole meridian therapy with acupuncture, with the whole 12 meridians in Chinese medicine? Because they talk
Well,
about being
I,
energy.
I'm not an expert on the meridians. I've read some papers and I've heard some lectures, and you know, I have great respect for not only the Chinese but the Ayurvedic healers from you know, 5,000 years ago. They seem to know what they were doing,
Mm,
and 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 their techniques are used by some people today, and the techniques seem to be helpful. Beyond that, you know, we've done no particular experiments on the meridians, acupuncture points. I have had some therapies myself that are based on that, and the therapists seem to know what they're doing, and so I don't really have much to say on that issue because I've not delved into it,
mm.
not as much as you have.
I'm interested. Yeah, I mean um, the structure of the hemoglobin. I was looking at where there's parallels of that in other systems or in nature. So we've got the chlorophyll, where you can see a similar geometry, but replacing the iron with the magnesium. And then you've got it in vitamin B12 as well. This kind of similar. It's like the efficient organization, like the bees do the honeycomb structure to efficiently organize things. And is it something about the structure of this hexagon or octagon shape which allows electrons to flow better in some way, you think?
Yeah, I think that shape is particularly important, and it's important in an area that you might or might not be thinking of right now. And let me amplify it a little bit. Um, the first the first step of photosynthesis, you know, photosynthesis in plants is, I think, 20 steps, most of which are not really very well understood. But the first step, light comes in and water is split into positive and negative, into H plus and OH minus. And that's been known for many, many years. But what has not been known is how this occurs. You know, simple logic. If you present this to a middle school student, they're going to say, "Well, wait a second. How do you split water into minus and plus? Because minus and plus like each other, and they don't want to be apart from each other. They want to be engaged with each other. So how does this first step of photosynthesis? It's said that the plus and minus are separated from one another, but why should they separate? They just absolutely love to be in contact with each other. You know, so it doesn't make any sense. I was alerted to this by someone who studies photosynthesis. So now we come back to your question. What we found as described in the book I mentioned, The Fourth Phase of Water, and many papers beyond, is that indeed water splits into positive and negative, which basically forms a battery. But the same question arises: what keeps them apart from one another? And therein comes the hexagon. So the negative easy water has a honeycomb shape. It's built of hexagons, and the holes in the hexagon, and it's layer by layer, one sheet after another. It could be hundreds of thousands of sheets, and each sheet is a honeycomb sheet. And the honeycomb consists, well, you know what the honeycomb looks like. It's got, you know, the hexagons and little holes, and in theory, stuff can penetrate through the holes if they're small enough. But so you've got this dense negatively charged entity, and the positive charges lie just beyond. Now, the positive charges always want to come back to the negative, right? The negative and positive love one another, but they can't penetrate because the holes are too small. And so the positive charge consists of protons, but when in water, the protons combine immediately with water molecules forming a so-called hydronium ion. This is standard chemistry. And the hydronium ions are bigger than the holes, the openings in the hexagon. So although they desperately want to recombine with the negatively charged honeycomb matrix, they can't get in. They're kept apart. So this is very important because, you raise the issue of hexagons and honeycombs. And I think this is of absolutely central importance in understanding how the negative and positive are kept from one another, and how the charge remains separated. And the same thing presumably applies in the photosynthesis idea. So I hope I haven't deviated too far from your question, but I wanted to.
Honey itself, is it negatively charged when you eat honey? I think it is.
We never measured it, but likely it's true. Honey is a gel, and we studied many gels, and if you and so have others. And if you stick an electrode in the negatively charged gel, or in the gel, you get a negative electrical potential, just like inside the cell.
In these old Victorian Tesla energy healing devices we were looking at earlier, I remember actually they were insulated with beeswax.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah,
that is interesting. I was like, okay, so beeswax must be a great electrical insulator then.
Again, we've not studied it, but yeah, I mean, that sounds quite plausible. Yeah, absolutely.
And so honey is like considered good in a way that it can neutralize free radicals in itself, and might be,
Well, so many substances are charged, either negatively charged or positively charged, and many people don't realize this, or don't understand it. So, for example, I always think about pH, and if you have low pH, people talk about a lot of positive charge, a lot of protons and such, and they say, well, it looks like it's positively charged. And they have high pH, alkaline water. Some people say it's negatively charged. I interviewed numerous people. They come to my office, and I ask the same question. If you have an acidic solution, is it neutral or is it negatively charged? And if you have a basic solution, is it neutral or is it negatively charged? And the answers in each case were 50% yes, 50% no.
Water could be like 6.5 pH, but have a negative ORP of minus 600 MV.
Well, okay, just forget ORP for the moment, because I think that complicates matters, or maybe it simplifies matters for you. But the point that I wanted to make is that when we go to school, we never learn. 50% of the people think that low pH has net positive charge, and 50% said no, it doesn't have net any kind of charge, because you can't have charges sitting in water. It means that we don't know the answer to it. So we studied it, and we wrote a paper 2 or 3 years ago, published, and we found that's exactly what you're measuring. That when you measure low pH, you're really measuring a positive charge, because the electrodes that you use to make the measurement are sensing a voltage, which basically senses an electrical potential difference, charges, which the potential difference arises from separation of charges. And we found that there's a direct correlation, almost perfect correlation, with the pH measurement and the net electrical charge. And so, although 50% of the people I interviewed said, no, it can't be, we found that it is. And so it means that solutions, and also gels, like honey, are perfectly capable of carrying net charge, either positive charge or negative charge. And I think that's really important because the concept of pH often, I found that a lot of people are confused by it. It's a kind of more complicated measurement than simply saying, you have low pH, it means you got electrical charge or positive charge. You have high pH, you got negative charge. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because you were asking about charges. So I thought that was relevant.
So ORP and pH are completely different things, but
well, if
all the measuring tools we're talking about, ORP, TDS, they're all using electricity, electron measurement, or wave or light measurement, aren't they? Like the pulse oximeter you mentioned in the paper as well, because that's not really measuring oxygen.
We don't know if it's measuring oxygen. It's measuring something, that something has been interpreted as measuring oxygen, but it could be measuring something completely different. It's a correlation that they found, and the correlation that was interpreted as being a measurement of oxygen. But if there's no oxygen gas, there's something else like electrons. It could be a measurement of electrons, and that hasn't been studied.
Yeah. So actually, but then when you do give someone oxygen and you measure it, they will see the change, but you can't say the change was down to the oxygen if the oxygen's carrying the electrons.
Precisely.
Yeah. So how would you test your theory or hypothesis in that way? Could someone breathe some charged gas that's not oxygen, for example? And
well, the method that I was thinking of was to pass electrical currents through your body if you're having trouble breathing, and if it's electrons that are, as I've been hypothesizing, if the electrical current is applied in the right way, it should be possible for you to not breathe at all, but survive perfectly well on electricity. Because if the electricity is applied the right way, it could be supplying the electrons that you need in the cardiovascular system. I realize that sounds awfully radical.
No, it's not. It made me laugh because you're kind of describing the Matrix, the film. I mean, where like they're in the little pod with the thing attached to their brain, and then there's some jelly.
Well, there are lots of there's one electrical measurement. There's a Swedish guy who claimed that he was able to reverse cancer by applying electricity. And it wasn't published in mainstream journals. It was written in his notebook, and it wasn't taken very seriously by scientists, except that the guy was in some way distinguished. He was head of the Nobel committee at the Nobel Academy that chooses Nobel laureates, head of that committee. So, he was not an insignificant person, and you kind of think that there might be something to what he actually found. That this desperately needs repeating, because if what he says is correct, then you have a new therapy. I mean, this was I think 50 years ago that he found it. But electricity is undervalued. I think we're actually electrical beings, and I know that we have evidence that you get at least some of your energy from electricity, because the electricity builds easy water, and easy water has battery-like energy. But it might be even more than that. And it brings me to I don't want to deviate too much, but the role of ATP. We all learned in school that the energy that we have is chemical energy, and it comes from the high energy phosphate bond in ATP. And that was found in, I think, 1941 by a prominent scientist named Lippincott. And I found out first on the website, which doesn't exist anymore, by Gilbert Ling, or a modified version exists that doesn't have all the information that, it was a year or two later when someone published a paper, which I've not been able to find, saying that these guys at Lippincott and company, they made a simple arithmetic error. There is no such thing as a high energy phosphate bond, which means the idea of energy coming from ATP is questionable. And then some years later, two guys in the muscle field, whom I know because that was my field, Morales and Podolsky, studied high energy phosphate bond of ATP, and they found there was nothing special about it. It was just like any other phosphate bond. And there have been several other studies after that. And scientists are completely unaware of those studies. And so the studies raise question whether it's really ATP, that the high energy phosphate bond that supplies all of our energy for whatever we do, or something else. And this needs desperately to be studied because it's nice to know where our energy comes from. But we found some instances where we could prove that, at least in those particular instances, that the energy actually came from, it was actually electrical energy, not energy from ATP. And there's indirect evidence that there are many more systems in our cells, in our bodies, that are run electrically. So the question is, this is a really important question, the energy, does it really come mainly, there are some exceptions that we proved, does it come mainly from chemical energy of ATP, or does a lot of it, some of it, more of it, most of it, come from electrical energy? And we're studying this now, and we're trying to find out. And it may well be that most, at least some of our energy is electrical energy. And I think more and more people are beginning to appreciate the extreme importance of electricity in nature. So I'm sorry for that a deviation from it. I don't remember what your last question was, but anyway, I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, this whole topic. And just because we've been going for quite a while, and we could carry on for hours, but we should probably round it off now. But I guess one question I wanted to ask is, what further research would you encourage scientists to get into around this topic and others that you kind of have been sort of instrumental in kicking off, like the exclusion zone and this idea as well?
Search for truth, and this may seem, generally search for truth in any area of science. It might seem obvious that this is the role, this is what scientists should be doing, and that's pretty much what defines science, is to find natural truths. The system works against that right now. So scientists are like all people. We need to eat. In order to eat, we need money, we need salaries, and in order for people in our laboratories to eat, they need to have support, which comes from grants. And so during the present era, unlike maybe 100 years ago, right now, it's really important to get grant money. And if your ideas deviate from the mainstream, getting that grant money is, I wouldn't say impossible, but very, very challenging. So, for example, this is the example I love to give. I'm sitting here, I look out my window, I'm looking at Lake Washington, and it looks flat. And I could understand that many people, scientists, would say the Earth must be flat because it looks pretty flat out there. But suppose you, Mark Kent, in an environment where everybody knows that the Earth is flat, you find some evidence that actually the Earth may be round. You've seen satellite photos; it looks curved, you know, and you've seen pictures from the moon. It looks like a circle, and you decide this is so important that you're going to apply for a grant to study it. And so you spend a month or two preparing carefully worded grant application. And the application, you're laughing because you know the bottom line of all this stuff. The application goes to the gatekeeper of let's say I'm not sure what the British equivalent of the National Science Foundation is, but and the gatekeeper sees, oh my goodness, this is a really radical proposal, and I never heard of Mark Kent. Who the hell is Mark Kent? And so I got to figure out, is this application for real, or is this guy some kind of flake? And in order to be conscientious about this, I'd better hire reviewers who are the world's experts on the shape of the Earth to tell me or to tell us whether this should be funded or not funded. So who are these people? These are the most prominent flat Earth people reviewing a round Earth proposal, which challenges their esteem, their well-being. Well, you can imagine what the response is going to be.
Then when it actually did change, it was not the universities, it was the Vatican, wasn't it, and Copernicus. So yeah, and at the same time the calendar became the Gregorian calendar as well. You know, the tortoise shell thing that the Mayans used with the 28 dots and then the 13 blocks, so it's like 28 days per month and 13-month year in the solar lunar calendar.
Well, I'm not so familiar with that.
But at the same time as the calendar changing, so you not knowing when you are, you also got the globe flat model change happened with the Vatican from a Vatican priest who, not a scientist actually, but a religious kind of order of the Vatican, who also changed the calendar to influence the Western kind of pagan world to align with their Christmas and so on. But actually, before that, it was completely different. So yeah, I mean.
Well, I remember different stories about the Vatican.
Oh, and but another reason why it's a calendar. We follow the Gregorian calendar in modern life, but people like me, Mark Kent, follows the lunar solar calendar. Because we do use sound healing as sound frequency using devices on certain days like full moon, and I think this has been studied about parasite movement in the body during moon cycles is higher in a full moon.
Doesn't surprise me.
And frequency is used to suppress it and control that, you know.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not so familiar with that, but I do remember the story of Bruno, the guy who the church burned at the stake for his heresy and thinking that Copernicus might have been right, that the center of the universe is of the solar system is the sun, not the Earth. That's what I remember. That was, I guess, 600 years ago. You know, they cut his tongue so he couldn't spout any heresy. They stripped him naked and burned him at the stake and threw his ashes into the Tiber River.
I mean, this is why I think for scientists, like young scientists today, I would take your thinking and your ideas and develop things that can help people, like the Tesla violet ray device, for example, or a device that can wire up someone and improve their electron respiration, for example. Like actually invent a product that helps people and get the money from the private sector, like businessmen and crowdfunding. And
yeah, I mean, who can be against something like that except the people who profit from the opposite? But you're talking about technology. I'm talking about science. I'm talking about fundamental science, which is in a way different because it doesn't have those investors who stand to make a profit if the technology really works out. And so, you know, like the computers that we're using today to communicate with one another, you know, that's technology, and technology often has lots of money that comes from investors, but fundamental science doesn't. You know, if you need money for fundamental science, there are some foundations here and there, but mostly we get the money from the government, and the way the government institutions work is they depend on experts, and the experts don't like to be challenged. And so if you're challenging the experts with a new idea about fundamental science, chances are you're not going to succeed. It's structured in just the way to guarantee that it won't succeed.
And then it results in like the guys in Africa, who's made these radio towers, make plasma electricity and power a village from just like Tesla would for Tesla towers, or radio towers, just, and even sound, like a speaker reversed with a magnet is the opposite, isn't it, of it's like a battery.
I'm not sure I understand the opposite of what.
I've seen people reverse like a music speaker,
yeah,
and wire it up to a little motor, and it just spin a motor because of the magnet there, you know.
Yeah.
So I kind of think of sound as energy, you know, because the light and sound carries some kind of energy, whether you call it an electron or something else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in order to project anything through space, through air, through whatever, you need energy. You know, and I think sound is really one of those areas that's not well understood. There are various features of sound that are hard to figure out based on our concepts of sound. It's an area that I think is worthy of fundamental.
I do think so. Knowing, for example, if you look at the chakra system in ancient medicine, the heart, for example, someone with a heart problem would benefit from the color of green and the frequency of 639 hertz.
Is that right?
Yeah, because that's the sound and the color correlate to each other. And if they listen to a pure tone of 639 hertz, it's like a kind of high pitched, tone, I guess. And then that would help their heart. And the color green, just filling their eyes with green, like looking at plants and forests, and helps the heart. This is like, again, ancient preserved ideas of Ayurvedic medicine or Chinese medicine are coming into more modern ideas today, I think, or people are using them more, I think.
I think so too. Yeah.
But yeah, I really do hope that these ideas in this paper, I think, really major, kind of built on the whole exclusion zone research stuff, but this is quite actually a next. I love it because it does question established views which aren't proven, but they're based on a collective understanding which might be completely way off, and probably is. But I think probably also for good reason as well, like with electricity, and fully understanding electricity makes it kind of available to everyone as well, which it's like...
Well, thank you. I appreciate your kind words about my conjectures,
but I guess you must have had a lot of backlash about it, because it will upset a lot of established. Can imagine the backlash was.
I'm waiting for it. I haven't had it. One student in my lab who tends to be critical told me that he doesn't like this manuscript a whole lot. But when I shared with him the reactions of various people, he said, well, maybe I need to reconsider. So, but so far I've not.
My reaction, just so you know, was, wow, this resonates so much with me, because it's really bang on with a lot of other ideas. And you know, we're into like hydrogen gas research, and I'm thinking actually this gas is an antioxidant, reduces oxidative stress, and it helps along this. It's involved in this some way as well.
It should, if it's electrons, should reduce oxidative stress. If you,
it's negatively charged electrons in the gas.
Yeah.
Which we, again, as you say, because it's something you can't see, how do you prove it?
Well, that remains to be seen. So there's a lot of research that needs to go on in the future, and I don't claim that we're experts in the respiratory system. So it might be that that this may be left to others to pursue in more depth. Can't do everything, even though we'd like to.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I mean, ECMO machines in you know, the ECMO machines used by heart surgeons as well. They kind of they're like attached to oxygen tanks, so they kind of basically tap into the vein, run the blood through the ECMO machine, and then back in to the patient.
Oh yeah, okay.
ECMO machines, yeah, which there was some noise about them during COVID because of this whole talk about, you know, people going on ventilators rather than ECMO machines, for example. But I think ECMO machines, defibrillators, and other things used by heart surgeons and, you know, cardiologists are all to do with electrons. It's such an interesting hypothesis. So yeah, I hope like more comes of it. So that's why I wanted to make this video, and then I hope people can, or anyone who wants to comment, just please, you know, get the discussion going in the comments as well on the video here. So
okay, well, thanks, Mark. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about it, and much appreciated.
Oh, massive honor. No, it's great to speak to a great mind. But thank you so much for your time.
Okay, take care.
Take care.
Okay.